One last battle to hold the line against the night.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
Hold the line. No one gets through, no matter what.
Sir, what are your orders?
There's only one order, Lieutenant. Behold.
Incoming transmission.
Allied reinforcements have arrived from the west.
HollowNet on Mojo 50 Radio. The millennial conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
Oh, yes, indeed, double voice, children of all ages, the new millennial conservative resistance does indeed begin right here, right now, with you. You are listening to, and hopefully watching, the HollowNet on the mighty Mojo 50. Welcome to the show. Today is Saturday, the 12th of May, in the year of our Lord 2019. And we are in the clutches of a constitutional crisis. I don't know if you've been informed, but Representative Naylor in the House of Representatives, oh, you'd figure that's where it'd be, right? Representative Naylor has informed us all duly that we are in the throes of a true constitutional crisis, and the media are just abuzz. CNN Politics has posted how to know when it's a constitutional crisis. We have here from the New Yorker. Is this the official Trump constitutional crisis? Jerry Nadler. I keep saying Naylor, like Nick Naylor from that Thank You for Smoking movie, because this guy seems to be about as astute and honest. Slate. Are we in a constitutional crisis? This is how democracy ends, not with a bang, but with a long technical debate over whether or not we're using the right words. Come on, guys. Let's quit the theatrics. Oh, God, USA Today. Comey says, oh, look, a voice of reason in the room, and it had to be from friggin' Comey. U.S. is not in a constitutional crisis, but our system is being stress-tested. Ooh. National Review. Oh, finally, an intelligent adult enters the room. Constitutional crisis as absurdist theater. Jerry Nadler has declared a constitutional crisis. The proximate cause is a couple of redacted lines, including one footnote in a 400-page report. Let's be glad, for the sake of the Republic, that the entire page wasn't withheld. So yeah, that's the kind of crap storm we're wading into in the post-Mueller report Trumpian age. And they are really getting ready for 2020, man. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to Matt Locke and the Conservative Cartel, but he's been hitting on some solid points all week. Defenders Live have been just knocking it out of the park. Stephen Arian, Dylan Lyles, and the rest of the crew over at the Mojo 50. If you're not listening, you should be. And keep it here, man, because this is going to be your voice of reason, your voice of sanity, and judging from the Mojo 50 jackholes and jillholes at MojoCon 2019, that's really saying something. So, speaking of Mojo events, I did want to let you know, Mojo 50 is actually going to be on the road this year. It's insane. I'm stoked. We're all excited. Mojo 50 is going to be hitting the road this summer, and our first stop will be in July in Wake Forest, North Carolina. We'll be there to help celebrate the grand opening of the Tar River Arms retail location. Show hosts with live remote broadcasts will be on hand with prizes and giveaways, so plan to come out and meet the faces behind the voices and shop for your next gun purchase. Stay tuned for more details. Don't you go anywhere. And if you will be celebrating an event at your business and would like the Mojo 50 crew to be on hand to help, let us know by contacting info@mojo50.com. So once again, Mojo 50 will be hitting the road this summer. July, we will be there in Wake Forest, North Carolina, for the grand opening of Tar River Arms. We'll hear more about them later on because they are one of our segment sponsors here on the HollowNet. And I'm pretty glad to say that, honestly. I mean, it makes me happy. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump into it. We have to. I'm not going to jump into the constitutional crisis right away, really just because I want to finish a thought. I want to complete a thought. Not a thought, that hoe over there. Not a thought. But last week we discussed the dirtiest presidential campaigns in history, and this puritanical concept that President Trump has lessened the republic, and he's made it to the point where we just can't have civil politics anymore. Can't we just get back to an air of civility? I got news for you. Buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy. Kansas is going bye-bye. American politics has never, ever, last week I think I channeled my inner Chris Jericho, ever been civil. We're not civil when it comes to politics. I mean, I think we come second to maybe the British or like the Taiwanese parliament, where they actually get into a legit fist fight. But really, folks, this is nothing new. This is not something that should be shocking for anybody. No, American politics are just nasty. I can look back to a number of articles. Forbes asks, the dirtiest presidential campaign ever? Not even close. And points back to mudslinging in the 1800s. It was 1800 when President John Adams and Vice President Jefferson, I think I touched on this before, established a long tradition of negative campaigning. John Adams, let's see here, one of his supporters publicly suggested that if Jefferson were to become president, we would see our wives and daughters the victims of legal prostitution. The concern was amplified by an influential and highly partisan Connecticut newspaper's warning that electing Jefferson would create a nation where murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will openly be taught and practiced. Kinda makes, President Trump's comments about rapists coming over the border seem a little tame, doesn't it? And that was just the soft stuff, okay? That was the nice stuff. James Callender, he was an influential journalist at the time who wrote pamphlets secretly funded by Jefferson against Adams, said that Adams was a rageful, lying, warmongering fellow, a repulsive pedant, a gross hypocrite, behaved neither like a man nor like a woman, but instead possessed a hideous hermaphroditical character. For those who don't know, a hermaphrodite is one who has both male and female organs. These days, they're referred to as the transgendered. Yeah, it's fun times. So, you think that things are nasty now? You think that things were nasty under the Obama administration? You think things were nasty with the way the press treated President George W. Bush? Hell no, folks. Politics in this nation is ugly. It is a no-holds-barred contact sport. If you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And, probably ought to stay away from the disposal, too. AOC. Yeah, enough about that. Oh, my God. So, that's just one of the posts. I also looked at, there's stories everywhere, and a lot of them are just trying to be nasty and demean our American history and our culture. Like one of them from Ranker is 15 horrifying facts about the Founding Fathers they purposely kept out of the history books. And, a Supreme Court justice who was arrested and attacked by a mob. Patrick Henry kept his mentally ill wife locked away because, in context, that's what you did with mentally ill people in 1800. But, there's lists of these everywhere. Adams versus Jefferson, again, is described as one of the most brutal campaigns in history. And then you have, let's see here, IVN US, 4 of the most brutal presidential campaigns in history. 1828, John Quincy Adams, not to be confused with President John Adams, in his campaign against Andrew Jackson. Check this out. This is 20 years after the Jefferson-Adams campaign. and it's frickin' brutal. The deal between Henry Clay and John Adams came to be known as the corrupt bargain of 1824, and it created the Democratic Party when Jackson and his faction broke away from the Democrat Republicans. Okay? Then Jackson and Adams faced off in 1828. Adams had dirt on Jackson's past, and the two brought the rivalry public. Now, Jackson and Adams got very heated. Adams supporters straight up accused Jackson of murdering, straight up frigging murdering 6 of his own militiamen. Jackson supporters accused Adams of using public funds to buy a pool table and gamble in the White House. Jackson's wife, who'd been previously married, was accused of adultery. Adams was accused of using prostitutes to gain favor with Russia during his time as ambassador. So, apparently collusion with Russia isn't a very new concept either for the Democratic Party. Seriously, the Democrats have been accusing the Republicans of collusion since 1828. Oh, that's wonderful. Anyhow, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson. This was like one of the worst breakups in political history. This was progressive versus progressive, except it was a Republican progressive versus a Democratic progressive. At least that's what it wound up in. You see, first it was Taft and Roosevelt going head-to-head in a Republican primary, which Taft won, and Roosevelt got pissed off, took his ball, and went home. And he decided to form the Progressive or Bull Moose Party, which resulted in a split ticket and pretty much sealed the deal for Woodrow Wilson, everybody's nightmare who brought us income tax and the 14 points and pretty much everything wrong with modern American politics. Yeah, it's all thanks to him. Because Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft got into a pissing contest. Yeah. 1964, Lyndon Johnson versus Barry Goldwater of Arizona fame. Let's not forget the infamous Daisy Girl TV ad, which sent the message that Goldwater would lead us into nuclear war. Shocked the American people by depicting a little girl getting nuked. I mean, these days that seems a little genteel, a little bit tame. You can see that inside the first 15 minutes of frickin' Terminator Judgment Day. So, there's that. But we have to absolve ourselves and clear the air of this historical revisionist concept that American politics has ever been pure and clean as the fresh-driven snow, that there ever was such a thing as civility in American politics. There never has been. There never will be. It's an ugly game. It's not for children. President Trump is just the latest in a long line of bombastic populist presidents and politicians in general. I mean, William Jennings Bryan basically invented populism in the Midwest in the early 1900s. Overturned the Democratic Party and led it down a hellacious road. So as soon as we get away from this fiction that the mainstream media has been force-feeding us, the better off we're all going to be. American politics isn't civil. It never has been. It never should be. You have to remember, one of the best descriptions of American politics, of the American presidential system, of the electoral system as a whole, is that of a bloodless revolution. Every 4 years, this country has a revolution. It's a revolution at the ballot box, where a slip of paper is mightier than a bullet. So we're coming up on the revolution of 2020. And it's not going to end the way the Democrats think. I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point that if an impeachment attempt goes forward, don't even bother moving the furniture around. President Trump is in for 4 more years. Now, it's kind of funny. I get over my shoulder here. If you notice, I didn't do the green screen this week because I'm back home, and I figured, let's get back to the old school roots. I got the Mojo 50 logo right up there. And I posted online. I'm actually pretty proud of these. I actually got my press credentials from Mojo 50. That's pretty wild. And hung it up with my media credentials from the White House press pool when I got to go to the President Trump rally in Mesa this past year. That was pretty wild. But I am so proud to be working with the honorable, intelligent, entertaining ladies and gentlemen of Mojo 50. And again, if you haven't checked out our other shows, you really should. But I figured I would just kind of go back to the way I used to do things without all the green screen, the technology. Just me up against a black wall, just rapping at you a little bit and going over the insanity of the past week. And one of the things that triggered this was an extended Facebook conversation and debate between me and a friend of mine. I've referred to him many times. His name's Will. And before you guys get up in arms, he's a progressive. He really is. He's a dyed-in-the-wool progressive of the Theodore Roosevelt old guard progressive strain. And he and I, going back to the Obama years, we had some legendary debates. We used to work together. In fact, we got in trouble. Not because he and I got fresh, but because people around us would start mixing it up and getting into bad fights. So he and I had this long string. I hope he listens to this show. I highly doubt it because he doesn't like a lot of my opinions. But I posted a picture of these little devices here online. And I said, I know that pride can be a bad thing, but I have to admit I'm pretty damn proud of these. And I tagged Mojo 50, and I tagged President Donald Trump's campaign, because that's where this tag came from. And Will pops up and says, "So are you now pro-Trump? When did that change?" Clearly he hasn't been paying much attention to me lately. I explained to him, as I've explained many times on this show, and as most Mojo 50 fans will regularly attest, along with other HollowNet operatives who've been with me for a while, I don't consider myself hardcore pro or anti-Trump. I've said it again and again. When he does something I see as good, I cheer. When he does something I think is stupid or bad, I groan. I'm a pro-American constitutionalist conservative with libertarian tendencies. I do believe in our binary political structure, the way it sits right now, President Trump is the only viable choice in 2020. As right now, I think we're up to 22 players in the Democratic field, and half of them, I think Joe Biden said their campaign slogan should be "Google me." Matt Locke earlier today, if you didn't listen to the Conservative Cartel, check out the show. He was talking about the prospect that, as I believe, I actually stated a couple months ago as well, could we be seeing the entry of Michelle Obama into this race? And how much of an earth shaker would that be? That would clear out the entire stable of the Democratic Party. They would jump in lockstep behind Michelle Obama, and that would be a race to watch. That, I think, would be the biggest threat to President Donald Trump staying in office in 2020. And I think it would be the most fascinating, from a purely political standpoint, from somebody who watches politics and who enjoys watching politics. That would be the fascinating race to watch. So, speaking of things that are fascinating to watch and fascinating to listen to, if you haven't checked out Spoonie yet, you need to check out Spoonie. With Spoonie, it's either listen or starve. Get over and check out our Spoonie channel. They're all about food and fun and having fun with food and vice versa. If you're going to eat it or have fun with it, they're going to be talking about it. It's a one-of-a-kind, 24/7 food talk radio channel. You've got great shows like Chef Patrick's Food Biz Pro. Chef Patrick was kind enough to let me crash his party last Friday. I had an amazing time. It was awesome. We talked about food here in Arizona, the diners going under in Jersey, and he reminisced about growing up here in Arizona. It was great. If you like food, you want to learn more about your favorite recipes, or even learn more about cooking, fitness, culture, and nutrition, Spoonie Radio is your station. Like I said, Chef Patrick's Food Biz Pro show is there, along with a great lineup of experienced show hosts who will entertain and inform all about all things food. That's at www.spoonie.com, Spoonie Radio, spoonie.com, and as I said, check out Chef Patrick's Food Biz Pro, Spoonie Radio. So back to what I was saying. Will and I are going back and forth on this thing, and it's like 26 comments long. And I said, in our current binary political structure, he is the only viable choice for president in 2020, I can tell you that. All that said, I suppose I'll take conservatives who haven't taken up residence inside the president's ass for 1,000, Alex. He said he sincerely hopes, he said, mind you, not me, he sincerely hopes that if he isn't impeached and removed from office, that he gets primaried. He'd rather see a saner Republican than gamble on a loser Democratic candidate like Biden. This tells you the reception that Biden is getting among the progressive branch of the party. He's dead on arrival. Flatline. Not going to go anywhere. Ron Cable, a longtime listener, friend of the program, said Trump is the reason he chose not to put his efforts into the political realm for now. There may be hope in the future if we can hang on to our principles and values. Ron is much more of a, I would say, old guard conservative. He has some fantastic principles, and he actually is starting up a new group out there. I believe it's called the Conservative Cooperative, and you want to check that out. You can find him on Facebook under the Conservative Co-op or Conservative Cooperative. I had to ask Will, though, following that, is he jonesing for President Pence? Because I know a lot of people on the left, especially on the progressive left, their only bigger nightmare than President Trump is to have Vice President Pence ascend to the presidency, because they see Vice President Pence as representing the religious right of the party. And I can tell you, if you want to see some pretty hardcore moves in the pro-life direction, and also in the treating LGBTQ more as a mental illness than as a orientation, I think that is something we could potentially expect from President Pence. I would like to hope that his deep-seated religious beliefs and his opinions on homosexuality would not creep into his office, but it's a bit much to hope for. I mean, you have to judge a man by his past performance, and we have seen laws passed in his home state of Indiana with respect to valuing conversion therapy and things like that. And my opinions on, LGBTQ, AAIP, HIJK, LMNOP are that libertarian base, that libertarian deep core, where I don't care what you do. If it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg, what difference does it make to me? And I actually published that a couple of years back when I said a constitutionalist's response to gay marriage, where I said, I would cheer if it was done the right way, if it was done in a way that respected the Constitution. But the Hodges v. Overfell decision was not. The Hodges v. Overfell decision was legislation from the bench. This should have been handled at the state level. But I digress. I'm getting off track now. So in this long online exchange, we circled around many times, and I said, I find it more and more disturbing that a person can be tried and convicted in the court of public opinion without a shred of hard, non-circumstantial or hearsay evidence. In this example, President Trump or Justice Kavanaugh. When even a politically driven, openly hostile, and biased investigation can yield zero proof of criminality, yet this assertion with great certitude from the left continues. It's staggering. All of the charges against President Trump and Justice Kavanaugh were emotionally driven, not evidentially or factually so. Is the president a bit of a phallus? Yes. And you also just described most wealthy New York businessmen and many well-bred judiciaries. But being a Delta Bravo is not illegal yet, nor should it be. And I said to him, I made a pretty bold statement. because he cited, obstruction of justice is a crime, and how many former prosecutors have signed on saying that there was obstruction this, obstruction that. I said to him this: if there is evidence, then Congress should move forward with impeachment. And the truth will out. But I'll tell you what, I've taken the fact that they don't have the balls, the testicular fortitude to bring this to an impeachment as prima facie evidence that they've got nothing. They have no case. They lack the political will to even make the attempt. If there was something there, they would have been and done already. But what they prefer, what is better for them, is simply to continue to use this scandal as a cudgel to beat the president with over and over and over again and stymie his efforts. It's shameful. And if they thought blowback from Mueller's non-exoneration was bad, a failed impeachment attempt would be catastrophic for the Democratic Party. Frankly, they lack the conviction to go all in. So every time Kamala Harris or, God, what's her name? I can never remember it. From Southern California. She's the one that said to, confront people in restaurants. Why can I not remember her name? Why am I spazzing on it? I'll think of it later. But when you have representatives who are calling out and screaming out for impeachment, I feel a little bit like Rorschach toward the tail end of... oh, wow, I'm just drawing blanks tonight. Where he just looks... Do it. Do it. If you really think you can get somewhere with impeachment, do it already. Quit talking. Because I'm not listening to you. Fun times, fun times. So I digress a little bit. I got a couple of fun stories we're going to get to, a couple of weird ones, and then we're going to dig in, as I said, to what the very definition of a constitutional crisis is and why this is a bunch of bull. And it's getting disgusting. It's a constitutional crisis every time the Dems get pissed. That's what it's coming down to. That's all there is to it. But we're going to walk through what the actual examples of a true constitutional crisis are. And I'm sorry, but a pissing contest between the legislative and executive branch does not a constitutional crisis make. It's not how it works. Alright, so that message means we need to take a little break. When we come back, couple of stories that you're going to find funny, and then we're going to dig into it. What truly is a constitutional crisis? You're listening to HollowNet on Mojo 50. Stick around.
With a high and a piccolo and see people coming together not for divisiveness of party or for dichotomy of thought, but for unity in principle. And the principles that founded our nation, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, ladies and gentlemen, those principles are under the sternest attack that we have seen in many generations. It has become a crime in this nation nearly to express a difference in opinion from what is held by your party to be doctrine, from what is purported by the media to be truth. We have an opportunity to reach out to our fellow Americans regardless of their creed and regardless of their political inclinations, and unite as Americans, not as Republicans or as Democrats, as liberals or conservatives, but to unite around the principles that have guided this nation so well. I've covered a lot of stories, but the story that remains untold is the story of America in the 21st century, when we choose to turn back the tide against progressive socialism, when we choose to embrace the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, when we remember what it is to be Americans. And that principle will not die as long as there's one man, one woman, one child who looks defiantly into the night and says, I am free.
HollowNet on Mojo 50 Radio. The millennial conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
Oh, yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are indeed listening to and hopefully watching the HollowNet on the mighty Mojo 50. Thank you for sticking with me through the first half of the show. If you have not yet been able to find us on the socials, on the medias, we are on the Facebooks and the MeWe's. Facebook.com/HollowNet. You can find us on Twitter at The HollowNet. Find us on Mojo50.com, of course, and www.theholonet.com. Make sure you also check us out on YouTube. We are on the BitChutes. We are also on the MeWe's. Everywhere great podcasts and great videos are found. Of course, live streaming on iHeart. And if you miss us, you can catch the podcast on Spreaker and everywhere else great podcasts are located. So thank you for sticking with me through this schlep this week. Oh, I know. No high-tech stuff behind me. Just having to look at my pretty mug the whole show. I don't know how you manage it, but you know what? I love you for it. So, jumping right to it, we go to a story from the Hill. From the Hill. By Gregory J. Wallens, who's an opinion contributor. He writes, there's a looming constitutional crisis, but it's not about Mueller report redactions. He goes on to say, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared yesterday that the country is in a constitutional crisis, but she made President Trump's assertion of executive privilege as to the Mueller report redactions the face of the crisis, when in fact it's far from a crisis. The real constitutional crisis is Trump's vow to fight, quote, all the subpoenas served on his administration by House Democrats, which threatens the vital checks and balances of the Constitution. So you remember when we were talking before about people saying, it's just the words that you use. You have to remember, President Trump's speech in general is hyperbole-laden.
He says he's going to fight all the subpoenas, all of them. I'm going to fight all of them, and we're going to win bigly, hugely big. Yeah, no, I don't think that's the case where they're going to fight absolutely every subpoena that comes out of the Democrat House of Representatives. No, he's going to fight the ones that are related to the Mueller report redaction, because he's already rendered a decision on that on national security grounds, exerting executive privilege, and his tax returns, because he's stated again and again he has absolutely no intention of yielding those, and probably any other point that he thinks is bull. He's probably not going to want to give those up. So I really just, I can't see it. You know, I just can't get there in my mind where people are reading constitutional crisis. But, you know, I'll let him go on. He says the real constitutional crisis is Trump's vow to fight all the subpoenas, all of them. It sounds like it should be a bad word, you know, subpoenas, especially when you say it the way Trump does. You worry about all the subpoenas. Anyway. Assertions of executive privilege are a chronic but manageable feature of the American government. Every president since Eisenhower has asserted a claim of executive privilege at least once. Clinton did it 14 times. George Bush and Barack Obama asserted executive privilege in response to congressional subpoenas concerning the alleged politically motivated firing of U.S. attorneys and Operation Fast and Furious scandal, respectively. Neither was considered a constitutional crisis, and both were eventually resolved without a threat to the constitutional system. But none of the presidents ever vowed to fight all subpoenas from a legislative chamber controlled by the opposing party. I don't know how solid that vow from President Trump is. I really just don't know. I think he's talking out of his ass a little bit here because he's pissed. Yeah, to be perfectly honest, because I do that too. You know, I get pissed off at my kids. No PlayStation ever again! And my wife has to kind of reel me in a little bit on that because you have to make realistic threats. I don't think this is President Trump making a realistic threat to the House of Representatives that he's going to reject all subpoenas. I think he's just going to stick to the ones that he thinks are crap. Anywho, the constitutional system is a delicate gyroscope, The Hill writes. Depends on balancing mechanisms, including the separation of powers, judicial review, checks and balances to keep from toppling over. Checks and balances simply means that, as James Madison explained in Federalist 51, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Pitting the executive and legislative branches against each other was the framers' way of preventing one or the other from running amok. So, in other words, with the president opposing the legislative branch right now, the Constitution is acting precisely in the manner it was intended to. President goes head-to-head with Congress. Congress goes head-to-head with the president. What's the next step? There are two. Number one, Congress can elect to impeach the President of the United States. Number two, they can seek injunctive relief through the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court ultimately decides the constitutionality of law and also the constitutionality of executive action. So that's the next step. And yet, you don't hear word one about an earnest attempt, a true attempt from the Democrat leadership in the House to talk about impeachment proceedings. You certainly don't talk about injunctive relief from the Supreme Court. You don't hear people in Congress and the House saying, well, you know, we're going to take this to the Supreme Court and they're going to order the White House to turn over President Trump's tax returns or to issue the unredacted Mueller report. No, you don't hear about any of that. Why? They'd lose. They will lose. The Supreme Court will strike them down right now. Hands down. Because the president's actions are constitutionally sound to this point. There you have it. So, before we get too long in the tooth, before we get too far down the road, I did want to give you some information about our segment sponsor. We talked about him earlier. Segment sponsor is Tar River Arms. Get over to Tar River Arms today. Check out their May promotions, including 6 Hour's P320 line of pistols and Smith & Wesson revolvers of all types. As always, Tar River Arms is the storefront that comes to you with free shipping on most purchases. It's no different than purchasing at your local gun store, except you did it wherever you wanted, and you did it on your schedule. Be sure to mention promo code MOJO50 at checkout, and watch for the grand opening in July of Tar River Arms' first retail location in Wake Forest, North Carolina, where Mojo50, boom, will be broadcasting live. TRA Guns is America's virtual gun store. Great guns, great prices, and great service. That's Tar River Arms, TRAguns.com, TRAguns.com, Mojo50 at checkout. Make sure you check them out. So, you trust Mojo for the marketplace of information. Trust Tar River Arms for the marketplace of weaponry. Yeah. So anyhow, back to this matter of constitutional crises. Now, 538 had a great story out. This is from 2017, and this is why it pays, folks, to have the strong Google Foo. The Google Foo must be strong. Okay? No weak Google Foo in here. February 9th, 2017, 6 a.m. They wrote, there are 4 types of constitutional crises. We're going to run them down real quick. I'm not going to read through the whole article. Link will be in the description. Make sure you check it out, though, so that way you can decide. I'm going to present you with the information. You decide. Is this really a constitutional crisis? Or is CNN just completely full of as usual? Is Nadler just sitting up there grandstanding? As usual. Is Nancy Pelosi asleep at the wheel? Is Nancy Pelosi even conscious? Has Nancy Pelosi turned into a bad guy from Star Trek? People on Twitter will get that one. Okay, so, number 1. First type of constitutional crisis. It's a situation where the Constitution doesn't say what to do. The Constitution is brief and vague compared to state constitutions sometimes. The vagueness has one major advantage. It makes the 18th century document very flexible, enough to serve effectively a 21st century society. But sometimes the Constitution leaves us missing sorely needed guidance and information. Such as when William Henry Harrison became the first president to die in office in 1841. At the time, it wasn't clear whether the vice president should fully assume the office or just safeguard the role until a new president could somehow be chosen, kind of similar to a regent in a royal situation. It wasn't until 1967, when the 25th Amendment was finally added to the Constitution, that the issue was resolved. When Vice President John Tyler took over, no one was sure if he was the real president or merely the acting president, nor was anyone certain what should happen next. Tyler asserted that he was, in fact, the new president, and since then, vice presidents have taken a step into service as a chief executive, have been treated as fully legitimate. But the early confusion took its toll on the perceived legitimacy of Tyler's presidency. Not in the article. This is me reaching back into the Wayback Machine to my history book. Tyler was called, instead of His Excellency, he was called His Accidency, which is harsh. And he fired back any correspondence that was addressed to the acting president of the United States was returned unopened. So in order for him to treat with Congress, Congress had to address matters to President Tyler, not acting President Tyler. Trolling had its birth early in American history. President Tyler, we salute you, sir. Anyway, the second type of constitutional crisis is when the Constitution's meaning is in question. Sometimes the Constitution's attempt to address an issue is phrased in a way that could allow for multiple interpretations, leaving experts disagreeing about what it means and making it difficult or impossible to address a pressing problem. In this way, the Great Depression and the Civil War created constitutional crises. The problem sparked by the Civil War is obvious. The fight rested on a bunch of unsettled constitutional questions. Let me see here. The biggest of which was about slavery and the federal government's ability to control it, a subject on which the Constitution at that time was silent. And while the Constitution provided information about how a state could join the Union, it didn't say whether or not one could leave it or how it would go about doing so. It obviously took a war, and my editorializing here, cost over 600,000 American lives to finally resolve that question. So that is a true constitutional crisis, where the Constitution is either difficult to understand or is silent on a topic. So moving on, the third type of constitutional crisis is where the Constitution tells us what to do, but it's not politically feasible. This category of constitutional crisis can crop up when presidential elections produce contested or confusing results. Think back to the 2000 presidential election when George W. Bush and Al Gore were separated by just a few hundred votes in Florida, the tipping point state whose electoral votes would determine the winner. The state's election results remained contested for weeks due to a number of irregularities and a Secretary of State who seemed determined to cut a recount short. In theory, the Constitution allowed for various solutions to the problem. Congress could have decided which of Florida's electors to recognize, or Congress could have determined that neither candidate had achieved a majority in the Electoral College and let the House of Representatives decide on a president, per the process spelled out in the 12th Amendment. Such outcomes, while certainly constitutional, would have been politically infeasible, creating a significant legitimacy crisis for the new president. Now, as we know, anybody who paid attention to recent history or was, politically active at that time, what we wound up with was a Supreme Court judgment, which assured President Bush's ascendancy to the presidency. But the House of Representatives has had to choose a president before. Last time was in 1824, and it was widely described as corrupt and created a massive backlash against the administration of John Quincy Adams. So again, in 2000, the Supreme Court stepped in and cut the recount short. The court's decision ended the dispute in Bush's favor, and Gore gave a televised statement announcing that while he disagreed with the decision, he would accept it. So this was, in my lifetime, a true constitutional crisis where, yes, there was a constitutional remedy, but it was not politically feasible. And this is the final type of a constitutional crisis. Again, this is 538.com. And very well cited article, by the way, so it carries a lot of gravity to it. The Constitution's systems of checks and balance set the various branches against each other as for the laudable purpose of constraining tyranny. However, due to partisan polarization, individual corruption, or any number of other reasons, sometimes the political institutions in these arrangements fail, sending the governmental system into a crisis. This was the type of constitutional crisis commentators were seemingly referring to in describing reports that Customs and Border Patrol agents, members of the executive branch, weren't following orders from the judicial branch under the Obama administration. That would represent a constitutional crisis when one branch of the government chooses to completely ignore the other two. That is a true constitutional crisis. So I'll give you an example here. If, hypothetically, the Congress were to take a case to the Supreme Court demanding that the redacted portions of the Mueller report be published and made available to them, if it went to the Supreme Court, the Solicitor General would argue that on behalf of the White House, or the White House special counsel would argue that on behalf of the White House, and Congress would either appoint a special counsel or would have a member of the House or Senate represent Congress. If the president were to fail in that case, if the Supreme Court ruled with the Congress, and the president persisted in refusing to release the unredacted information, that would represent an inherent constitutional crisis. That is where the institution itself has failed. This is the most grievous portion, the most grievous type of a constitutional failure, of a constitutional crisis. Now, in theory, they write, clashes between different parts of the governments regularly produce constitutional crises, in theory, but in reality, they often don't. If President Nixon, for example, had ignored the Supreme Court ruling which ordered him to turn over his taped conversations from the Oval Office, that would have been a huge crisis of this type, but he didn't. Government shutdowns are a somewhat milder example. During the brief shutdowns in the Clinton and Barack Obama years, some government functions remained in place, but in both cases, agreements were eventually reached. But these situations illustrate how the Constitution doesn't always provide safeguards or guidelines for making a decision when governing bodies reach a stalemate. That's why there are 3 branches of government, because a 3-way stalemate, or a Mexican standoff, is atypical. And that's not what we're looking at where we sit today. We are not looking at a true constitutional crisis.